In 1820, there was a city in America where rats floated down the streets after rainstorms, and the wealthiest families in the country were fighting to live there. Where free black women owned the shops, the Americans were the outsiders, and the dead had to be buried above the ground because the earth itself refused them. This is New Orleans, and almost nothing you've been told about it is right. New Orleans in 1820 was built on a mistake. The ground was so soft that houses sank if you didn't drive pilings 40 feet down. Coffins popped out of the soil during floods. Yellow fever killed 1 in 10 residents every summer. By any reasonable measure, the city should have been abandoned 100 years earlier. But it wasn't, because of the river. The Mississippi was the bloodstream of a young, hungry country. Every bale of cotton from Mississippi, every barrel of corn from Kentucky, every fur trapped in Missouri had to pass through this one bend in the river. And whoever controlled the bend controlled the money. So they stayed, they built, they buried their dead in stone vaults above ground and went back to work the next morning. In 1820, the levee was already crowded with 60 steamboats, black smoke pouring from chimneys, paddle wheels churning brown water, deckhands shouting in 6 languages before you'd walked half a block. A traveler from Philadelphia wrote that arriving here felt like approaching Babylon on the water, proud, perilous, and strange. He had no idea how right he was. Walk 1 block off the levee and everything changes. A banker in a tailored coat steps aside for a donkey hauling fish. A Creole woman in lace passes a barefoot washerwoman carrying river water on her head. Wealth and poverty share the same courtyard. Candles and crystal on one side, scraps and chickens on the other. But here's what made New Orleans truly unlike anywhere else in America. The rules of race were different here. Free people of color, gens de couleur libre, owned property, ran businesses, hired white workers, and in some cases owned slaves themselves. A woman like Eulalie, born enslaved, could buy her freedom, open a pastry stand near the French market, and become wealthy enough to lend money to white merchants. This wasn't equality, it was something stranger. A 3-tiered society where Spanish colonial law, French Catholic custom, and Caribbean tradition collided with the harsh new racial code the Americans were trying to impose. And the Americans hated it. By 1820, they were pouring in. Restless merchants from Boston, broken soldiers from the War of 1812, gamblers chasing gold. The Creoles called them les Américains. Loud, Protestant, ambitious, and culturally illiterate. They wanted to remake the city in their image. The Creoles refused. So a line was drawn, Canal Street. East of it, French cafes, Catholic processions, absinthe, opera. West of it, whiskey saloons, Protestant hymns, English signage. The strip of mud between them was called the neutral ground, a name New Orleanians still use for street medians today. One Creole playwright wrote, "Across canal lies another nation. Same city, different dream." Here's something most people get wrong. The French Quarter of 1820 didn't have the famous wrought iron balconies. Those came in the 1830s and later. What you'd actually see is thick stucco walls in faded yellows and pinks, heavy wooden shutters, brick imported from Cuba, and Spanish-style courtyards hidden behind plain street facades. The city had burned twice in the 1790s, and the Spanish, who controlled it then, rebuilt it in their own image. The French Quarter is actually mostly Spanish. Inside those hidden courtyards, banana trees, small fountains, laundry strung between galleries. After supper, Creole families played chamber music while fireflies blinked over the flagstones. The newly rebuilt St. Louis Cathedral dominated the skyline, white spires cutting through the humidity. The square in front of it wasn't yet called Jackson Square. Locals knew it as the Place d'Armes. On Sundays, families gathered there while enslaved vendors sold pralines and fried plantains. And on certain afternoons just north of the quarter, at a clearing called Congo Square, enslaved Africans were allowed, by old French law the Americans hadn't yet stripped away, to gather, drum, dance, and sing in the rhythms of their homelands. If you'd stood there in 1820 and listened, you would have heard the earliest, faintest seeds of what the world would one day call jazz. Nobody knew it yet, but it was already happening. Now the part nobody likes to talk about. Every summer, yellow fever swept the city. Wagons rolled through the streets at night, lanterns swinging, collecting the dead. Doctors burned tar barrels in the streets because they believed bad air caused the disease. It was actually mosquitoes, but nobody would figure that out for another 80 years. Cemeteries filled and overflowed. Because the water table was so high, bodies buried in the ground floated back up. The solution? Tombs built above the earth in long rows, stacked like apartments for the dead. Tourists today call them cities of the dead. In 1820, they were just practical. And yet, the city danced. One woman's diary describes a lavish masquerade ball held the same week entire families died uptown. Grief, she wrote, could only wait until Lent. This was the contradiction at the heart of New Orleans, a place that refused to let death have the final word. Wealthy ladies wore silk in 95-degree heat. Gentlemen sweated through wool coats and starched collars. The opera ran 6 nights a week. Fortunes were made before breakfast and lost before dinner. A visitor wrote that New Orleans was a city of masquerades where everyone plays a part, even the beggars. He meant it as criticism. The locals would have taken it as a compliment. By 1820, New Orleans was the second busiest port in America. Only New York moved more cargo. Gold, sugar, coffee, cotton, furs, and enslaved people passed through its wharves daily. The profits built theaters, schools, orphanages, and mansions, often funded by the same blood-stained trade. Every crate unloaded on the levee fed both civilization and cruelty. Every coin that rang on the cobblestones carried the echo of unseen labor. But the city's real legacy isn't the cotton or the cathedrals, it's the mixing. For one strange electric moment in American history, French grace, Spanish discipline, African rhythm, Caribbean heat, Irish muscle, and American ambition all collided in the same square mile. Out of that collision came the food, the music, the architecture, the religious traditions, even the legal quirks that still make Louisiana feel like a different country inside the United States. The Americans tried to erase it. The Civil War tried to bury it. Hurricanes tried to wash it away. It's still here. So next time you walk through the French Quarter under the gas lamps, remember, the balconies are newer than the bones beneath them. The cathedral has been rebuilt 3 times. The square has had 4 different names. But the rhythm, the strange, defiant, 3 cultures at once rhythm of a city that was never supposed to survive, that's been here since 1820, and it hasn't stopped playing.